taught you guys a lot about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so what we're going to do in this workshop is we're going to apply some of those concepts, as well as also use another concept that you guys learned in week 1, which was APIs and documentation. Yeah, so I'm going to send a link to the GitHub. It also has a readme. So if you guys ever want to follow along, that's what I'm going to be using as like my, I guess, lesson plan. And if you guys ever want to test the code, all you got to do is just download the code. It's got like basically everything in it. So that's the one link that I suggest everyone have open if they want to, like, if they have any problems or any troubles with like following along with what we're doing today. Okay, so before we get started in like making the HTML, the JavaScript, all that CSS stuff, we're gonna go over a little bit with like I guess APIs in general. So does anyone remember? Oh, can you put the check-in code? Yeah, sure. Give me 1 second. Let me just find that thing. I sort of don't have it open. Okay. There we go. That's the check-in code, so just use that to check in. Okay. So the first thing we're gonna do is just do an quick overview of requests and APIs. So an API is sort of like a container information. It holds a lot of information that we, the users, can use and can access based on our choosing. So for example, the weather API. Oh, you weren't able to find the HTML intro, the GitHub link? Okay, so let me just pull it up on the side over here. So I'm gonna go to GitHub. Actually, I'm gonna go to a link that I sent. So right over here, right? So this is sort of the readme we're gonna be going through. We're gonna be like just going through all of this step-by-step instruction. The HTML is going to be all of this. So you technically don't need the bot in the back, and I just left that there if people are interested in checking out what I did for that. But these 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all of these 5 files are the most important parts that you really need. Is that clear with you, Fadel? Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, so back to what I was saying about weather APIs, right? So the weather API, you could send a request, a web request, and you can get information on the weather. And there's like different types of APIs. There could be like book APIs. There can be I don't know, like food APIs. A lot of interesting APIs out there, right? And to actually get the information from the APIs, there's some things called web requests, and you can send GET requests or POST requests. So remember that a GET request is mainly used to retrieve information, while a POST request is mainly to send information. And so like there's obviously other types of requests out there other than just GET and POST, like for example, delete and patch. But the main 3 requests we're going to be using is POST, GET, and delete. So to send information in web requests, a very common way is to use something called Json or JSON. I don't really know how to pronounce it, but it's JSON. So to send JSON objects, what you do is you have the name, which is like a key, and then right afterwards, it's the value of that key. So for example, over here, we have the name, we have the actual name, the grade, which and we're giving the actual grade information, the interest. And this is just a list of the values. So for example, in this one, it would be soccer and coding. So these objects behave really similar to like a dictionary. So similar to how we do in Python, if you want to access the first element inside interest, you could do something where you take this object's variable name, you put a dot, and then the key that you want to access. So since we want to access, for example, soccer, you would put JSON object or JSON underscore object dot interest. And then since this is a list, we're going to access the 0th index inside this list. So this is like, I guess, all that we need from the web requests workshop from last week. So, but if you do need, if there's still some concepts that are unclear to you, you can still access it right over here. I provided a link. So this would be the previous week's lesson. Okay. So continuing on, we're gonna start off by first setting up the HTML and CSS. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna use VS Code. You can honestly use any Windows Explorer. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a folder called 7WC demo. So what I did in VS Code was I opened my folder. So I did open folder over here. I located my downloads folder over here and I clicked select folder. So on the left over here, if any of you guys aren't familiar with VS Code, the left side has, it provides like an overview of what's inside the folder. So right now there's nothing inside it, it's all empty. But we can start creating things by using this new file button over here or on the top, the file, new file. I sort of didn't explain what we're gonna make today, but what we're gonna try to make today is a to-do list that uses a to-do API. Yes, you can also use Control-N. So let me just send it over here. And it makes an untitled file. We have to select where we want to save it. So, all right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the HTML and CSS, right? So just like what James explained, we're going to have something called index.html. So we're going to make that first. We're going to need a bunch of other hierarchy involved. So we're going to create an app.js. This is going to be storing our JavaScript file. And lastly, we're going to have a folder called style sheets, which is going to contain our CSS. I'm going to call it index.css because this CSS will point to index.html CSS, I guess. So this is how our folder looks like so far. We just have index.html, app.js, and index.css inside style sheets folder. So does anyone have any questions at the moment? Feel free to ask if any of this is unclear, but if you're good, send an okay in the chat, I guess. Okay. Perfect, good stuff. All right. What is app.js? So the last thing that James covered was JavaScript. So this is going to be where our JavaScript code is. I'll be explaining a little bit more on what we're going to put in app.js, but for now, just create the file because we're not going to be touching it at the moment. We'll be touching it later on. Okay. So let's see. So since we're going to be making this to-do list, we're going to first start off with this basic boilerplate code. Actually, we're going to bring up index.html on the left over here. So if you want to bring this up, you go to your Explorer and just double click on index.html. I'll just drag it over here. So right now it's completely blank because we have nothing inside of it, right? But once we refresh, we'll eventually see something once we put it into the code. Okay, so we're gonna start off with the basic boilerplate code, right? So we're gonna have doc type HTML. We're gonna have the head. And we're also gonna have the body. So I'm gonna explain a little bit of stuff here. So like what James explained in his workshop, the head is mainly sort of like just like the information for your website, while the body is for your website contents, I guess. So since we're making this to-do list web app, right, we're gonna need to create two main features. The first one is going to be creating a task. So making a task. The second one is going to be clearing a task because once you've done that task, you want to remove it, right? You don't want to see it ever again. So what we're going to do over here first is we're going to link up our CSS in JavaScript because that's the first step. So we don't have to worry about it later on. And we're going to do this all in the head section just to make it I guess, more concise. So we're going to put a link over here, and the href is going to link to index.css, which you see over here on the left. It's in style sheets. So we can't just do index.css because it's not in the right folder, because we have to go into style sheets and then it goes into index.css. So that's how we link the CSS. The next thing we're going to have to do is link the JavaScript with the HTML as well. So doing that, we're going to do script, add a source, which is in this case app.js. All right, is everyone clear with that? If you're clear with that, send an OK or something like that. Okay, give me 1 second. Chat disappeared for some reason. Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So another thing we're gonna do is, this is not really like that important, but just like a minor tidbit I want to add in. But some browsers, like super old browsers, they don't load JavaScript sometimes. So you want to, I guess, send them a little message. You need to enable JavaScript in order to use. So if you don't have JavaScript enabled, it's going to display that message. So most web browsers already use it, so we're good to go, I think. Next, we're going to put in a title, and we're going to call it to-do list. And just make sure that this is working perfectly fine. All right, so we got to-do list on the side. Okay. So now we're going to start adding some substance to it because there's nothing inside of it, right? So we're going to go to our body now. And what I'm going to do is I want my website to look like where on the left side, I'm going to have all the tasks. So like bake cookies, jog in the morning, I don't know, finish my math homework, all on the left side. And on the right side, I'm going to have the option to add tasks. So to do that, I'm going to make a div. It's sort of just like a container, I guess, of sorts. And I'm going to make the left side and the right side. So I'm going to make one div. This div is going to contain the contents, I guess. But this is going to be my main one. So I'm going to use something that James covered in the previous workshop, which is an ID. I'm going to call it main container. We're going to use this main container in our CSS to make it look better. But so in this first div, we're going to add a header tag saying to-do list, I guess. And the actual contents of this list is going to be, I'm going to make another ID called content. So this is where the contents of the list are going to go. All right. So outside of this div is going to be where we're going to be adding our tasks, and I'm going to use a form for this. A form is sort of like a sort of like what you see in a registration form. You honestly don't need this because all you need is a button, right? But I think it's good because you're going to be having like you're going to have like a text area input, and you're going to also have a button. So we're going to just have a header for what this exactly is. It's going to be an add task. Instead of using input, because tasks could be kind of big, I'm going to use something called text area. And I'll make the name task content because that's what the users are going to use to like put inside. The ID is going to be task content. And yeah, 30 and 10 are fine. So what this does is, okay, let's take a look at what text area looks like. Text area CSS, or not CSS, HTML. You just search this up. Not this one. There you go. So this is a text area. You see how it's pretty big, so I could put in a lot of information. If it was just input, it would be like a one-liner. And that's no fun if you want to make some big tasks, right? All right, so we got our text area set up. We're also going to add a button because how are you going to add that task otherwise, right? It's going to be a submit button, I guess. And we're going to add an on click, which we won't add yet. We won't really do anything with this yet, but we'll work with it later. We're going to add a class to it so it doesn't look ugly. And we're going to call it add. So that's all we have so far. You refresh, this is how it looks like. We have nothing inside of our to-do list yet, but we do have add tasks set up. So that's always good. But remember what I said before, I wanted to have the tasks appear on the left and the add task appear on the right. Now, how do I do that with CSS? Because the CSS is our way of making this look pretty. So what I'm first going to do is change this from a light theme to like a dark theme because I love light theme. So I'm going to use something, or I love dark theme, my bad. So HTML, I use this selector because I want it to be applied to everything in the website. And I'm going to change the background color to a black color. Like, let's say this is the one that I have. And then the color of the text is going to be white. And my font family, because I don't want Times New Roman, it's going to be Lotto and then Arial as the back. So if you refresh, this is how it looks like already. A little bit better than it was before. So I'm going to split this, I guess, just so you guys can see what I'm trying to link together. So I've defined the CSS for HTML, so the whole web page, right? I made the background color black and the text white. And I also made the font family Lado or Lado. What I'm going to do next is style the main container. So you see how I made an ID called main container, right? And in order to select the ID of main container in my CSS, I use hashtag. So hashtag main container. And this is where I'm going to define all my properties for the main container. I'm going to use something called flex. And you guys can look this up, but flex is a really cool way of being lazy. You don't want to spend a lot of time in CSS. So what this does is it sort of just organizes the contents inside main container. What I'm going to choose to do is I want to display my first div and my form in a row format with space around it. So if I save this and I refresh, what happened was my first div is on the left, my form is on the right. Oh, the check-in code? Yeah, I'll send it again. It should be, yeah, let me resend it. Oh, right, someone already sent it, nice stuff. Okay, so this is the cool thing about Flex. Once we finish styling the main container, because I think this is okay, we're gonna have our contents be styled as well. So we don't really have any contents right now at the moment, but we will soon once we use the API. So since contents is also an ID, I'm just gonna do the same thing as for my main container. This time though, it's going to be a flex, but not going on, not row format. It's going to be column format. I'll explain what this is in just a second. I'm gonna finish writing this. Okay. So what this does is I have a flex container that's going to go downwards in a column. So if I have items, it's going to go down column-wise instead of row-wise. And what does justify content and align items do? Well, similar to align text, align items will just align everything inside this content div into the center of that div. So if you ever want to center anything, these two are your main people. Justify content doesn't really center. It's sort of like just sort of like in Word, there's an option to justify like your paragraphs. This is sort of what it does. While align items aligns things in the, there you go. It says right there, along the cross axis of the current line of the flex container. So there you go. All right, what else do we have to add? So we've added main container, we've added contents. We're also going to add some CSS for task contents as well. All right, so we're gonna style the button actually. So you see how I added a class called button. What I'm gonna use is something that you can easily find inside the docs over here. Use something called hover. And hover is just a really cool animation. We'll see in just a second. One second. Yeah, let's add everything. Okay, I don't know what's going on here. Interesting. Oh, I see. I missed the class. No wonder. I was wondering why. Okay, yeah. So I didn't add the class in for form because we're also gonna style the form as well. All right, there you go. Okay, I'm just gonna copy because I'm super lazy. Let's do that. So I'm gonna explain everything over here, I guess. So for the form container, note that with CSS you can select multiple things, right? So I'm selecting the input inside the form container, and I'm also selecting the text area inside form container. And I'm going to apply these styles to it. So you guys learned about padding and margin constraints and sending with border. The width is just like how wide you want the element to be. And then I'm also going to style the button inside of the form as well, because remember that we added a button over here, right? And I changed the color, added some padding, border, cursor just so it changes, and all that stuff, right? So this is the part where I wanted to explain with the hover. So you see how the button, I have it set the opacity at 0.8. So when I hover over it, the opacity will change to 1 instead. So you'll see like a little bit of difference. If I refresh over here, interesting. So don't know why nothing is hovering. I don't know what's going on exactly, but the docs for it. So hover button. Just to give you guys an idea of how it looks like. So see these buttons, right? And you scroll all the way down, there are some hoverable buttons. These are sort of like the effects you can use to make it. Okay. All right, so our thing is already looking a lot better. We have our add tasks over here, and we have our to-do list, which will appear on the left over here. Does everyone understand what I've done so far with the CSS? Like mainly about flex, justify content, and align items. Okay, good stuff. So we're gonna add a little bit of things inside of our HTML contents just to see how it looks before we actually use the API. So we're gonna use some new HTML sections that you guys had to learn before. So since a to-do list consists of lists, right? So we're gonna use something called UL, which is an unordered list. There's also OL, which is ordered list, but since we don't really want any particular item to be prioritized over others, we're just gonna make it an unordered list. Inside the unordered list, there are some things called list items. And these are the items, I guess. So like, for example, if I wanted to make a list item and it's going to be like wash the dishes. I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to refresh. Right over here, you see we have wash the dishes 4 times, and you can change this up here. Like, I don't know, and this is our list over here, right? So that's sort of how it'll look like so far. That's how you create lists. Is everyone clear with that so far? Okay, good stuff. All right, so now we're gonna make it dynamic. And we're gonna get rid of everything inside the contents because this is all hard-coded, but we don't want it to be hard-coded. So this is what we're gonna use. We're gonna use a function that we're gonna make soon. We're gonna put it into contents. So we're gonna make a script, and it's going to call something called load list. We haven't made this yet because app.js is empty right now. So remember, this script calls everything, or yeah, just since I define app.js over here, I can call load list as long as load list exists inside app.js. So we need to actually create this function called load list. And the syntax for creating a function is like this. I'm going to create some boilerplate code, I guess. Okay, so let me explain what this is doing, I guess. So what this is doing is I defined a variable called HTML, and I made, just like what we learned beforehand, UL would be an unordered list, right? And I'm going to close off my unordered list. And then lastly, I'm going to put this HTML code that I just created into this HTML file at the position where the ID is equal to contents. So you see here, I have an ID called contents, right? So what's going to happen is this is going to turn, or I guess whatever's inside the contents is going to get overwritten. Whoa. It's going to get overwritten and become whatever this HTML file, or whatever this HTML is. So if we load this, there's going to be nothing inside because this HTML thing doesn't do anything yet. So if we wanted to actually add some things, so we could just say like HTML plus equals, we're going to add like one list item in just to see like how it looks, I guess. And then if we reload this, very interesting. What should have happened is I have my HTML. I added the list item inside, and then it should be appended to contents. So I'm very confused on why nothing is showing up. We all have this outside because it might be getting over it. Whatever you're having in the index.css doesn't show up. Okay, so that means that you might, I'm gonna deal with that issue right over here. So this is where you link the CSS with your HTML. Did you link it properly? So note that I created a folder called style sheets and inside it has index.css. Okay, yeah, good stuff. All right. So, well, I guess this is the part where we have to debug, right? Because usually nothing ever goes your way, I guess. There you go. Invalid left-hand assignment. Oh, okay. Yeah, I know my problem because I actually can't do things properly. So this is how the actual syntax looks like. There you go. See, if you just look at the console, if you ever have something like a problem like this, usually if you go to the console, there will be some like red thing in error. And you see over here how it says invalid left-hand side at an assignment at load list. And it says at 8. So I just looked at line 8 and I realized that my brackets are misplaced the whole time. So that's the reason why I didn't work right. Now if we refresh, we have another error. Nice. So this error says cannot set property of an HTML of null at load list. Okay, so I think we gotta actually like put something inside of it. That's what I'm guessing. There we go. Okay. So now it is finally loaded and we see hi. Is everyone clear with this so far? So all we've done is instead of displaying the list in here by like actually writing unordered list and then list item and all that stuff, we use a script to do it for us instead. So you see how I basically made the HTML code and I added it into the contents div. Sorta. Okay. Do you want me to explain it one more time or? Yeah, I'll explain it one more time. Okay. So what we did was we used this load list function, right? And all I'm doing here is I'm making an unordered list and inside of it has one list item. Okay, yeah, no problem. So do you understand this part so far? How about I print this out? So I do console.log HTML, all right? And I'm going to open up the inspect element and I'm going to refresh. All right, so this is what my HTML prints out, all right? So if I copy all of this, I'm going to remove this for now. And in my contents, I'm going to, oh, nice. My contents, I'm going to put whatever my HTML printed in here, all right? So right now, load list isn't being called because it's a function. The function only gets called when you call the function name. So I remove the function name, so nothing is being called right now. So if I save this and refresh over here, notice how this is not being printed anymore because I'm not calling the load list, right? But I did include the HTML code inside contents and it gave me hi. So all I'm doing is I'm using load list to display the code. So all I'm doing is having this code in here and I'm going to put it into the contents ID. So .inner HTML, all that does is it puts the HTML that I made into the element by ID of content. So you see how it So what it does is it looks everywhere in this HTML file for contents. It looks for the ID and it sees, oh, okay, this is contents. I'm going to dump the HTML right in here. So that's all it does. So yeah, and do this now, it gets printed out again. Does that make sense? Okay. You sort of get it, Alexander? Okay. It'll get clearer when we like do more of this. You'll see like we'll do a lot more examples than just this, because we're gonna have to put way more code inside of it. Okay. All right. So since we have this set up, we're gonna actually learn how to read the API. I'm going to pull it up over here because I want everyone to, I guess, open this up as well. So right over here. So this gives an example in the previous lesson on how we send web requests and APIs. So in this workshop, they sent requests using Python, right? Import a request and then they send a request using requests. We're gonna use some JavaScript stuff, but we're gonna first read the documentation for APIs because I think that's the most important part, is learning how to use an API. So I wrote a little API documentation right over here. See how it says to do documentation.md. You guys go to like the GitHub link. I'm going to open this in a new tab. And this is how the API looks like. So there are 3 endpoints. There is a way to get tasks. There's a way to create tasks. And there's a way to clear a task. Similar to what you guys did in the last web API workshop, right? And so it's hosted over here. There's nothing over here right now because this is not a valid endpoint. But if you call this thing at a specific username in which you guys will be getting in a few seconds, you'll be able to get information back. So I guess we're gonna have a little bit of practice in sending requests to APIs without using JavaScript at the moment. We're gonna use a third-party application. And let me pull that up. So you can use applications such as like Postman. So Postman, for example, right? What that does is it sends an API. I think I have it open right over here. Yeah. So I was testing stuff out. But since this is like to download, you don't really, it's kind of like a pain. So instead, you guys should use something called Hopscotch.io, and I'll send the link right now. Looks really, really nice. So yeah, I already did a lot of requests, but I'm just gonna clear everything. So this is how it should look like for you guys. So this hopscotch.io, it's a method for us to send requests to APIs and to test them without actually like sending them inside a JavaScript file. So before we even actually get started into this, I'm going to have you guys go on Discord, go into the 7-week challenge, and type in this command. I'll show it in just a second. So right over here, I have a little Discord bot, which hopefully should be running. It's called 7WC API bot. Yes, and if you type in a greater than and then request, it should give you, it'll DM you actually, it'll DM you a code that you will be able to use. Using light mode, yeah. You guys should try it. Oh, there we go. Lots of requests. Hopefully it works. Let me see if it's actually working. It'd be really sad if it didn't work. There we go. I see all your requests. Nice. So everyone is going to get that code, right? And that's your code. Remember that code because you're going to need that code to send requests. And I'm going to demonstrate with my code, okay? So we're going to learn how to read the API over here. All we're going to do is actually, we're going to first learn how to create a task. So you see over here, I put the endpoint. It says HTTPS. I'm going to copy this link, okay? Hope everyone has it open. We're going to go to Hopscotch and we're going to paste this URL in. You see how over here it says username? We're going to put in our username, our secret username that we got from the bot. Right over here, all right? We're not done yet because we have to realize what type of request it is. I did not specify, nice. But the create task request is going to be a post request. So you see how over here in the method, we're going to change it from a get request to a post request. You can call it request, whatever request you want. Honestly, we'll call it create task just so it'll be better for us to see what it is. The content type is a JSON, so that's all good. And what you should see here is a request body. The request body is what we want to actually insert. Or we want to remember that a post request is where we send information to the API, right? And in this API, it says for a create task, we're going to send a JSON object containing the contents of a task, and that creates a task. And this is how the JSON object looks like. It has contents and a random content message. And Hopscotch is nice because you're able to actually just like this. You don't have to actually use the raw input. You can just use the request body and then put in whatever you want over here. So I'll say like read books. There's one more thing you guys have to do though, because I don't want like random people using this API, right? And what I did was inside the headers, you're gonna need to add in an x-access token and put in this token right over here, which I'll send as well in the chat. Make sure that you add that into the header list. So not in parameters, not in authentication, not in this random stuff, but in headers, okay? The first one being x-access-token, and the second value being 7wc-zahai, which is my name. And once that's good, you can actually click send now. So I'm going to click send. And you should receive, hopefully, a status 200 with it saying request received and updated. So that means that what you've essentially done is you've sent a request for a task, and the API took that task and it is now stored in their database. Is everyone clear with the steps so far? I hope everyone gets a status 200. So that would mean that everyone's task got sent. If everyone got to the step or created the task, a 401. Okay, so if you got a 401, it could either mean that the URL was wrong, you guys didn't put in the token properly, or the contents is incorrect. Oh, nice. Madison, do you know your problem is? Like the URL works perfectly fine, right? And your token should also be spelled. I'll send this as well. Yeah, because this is one thing you gotta make sure to send. And once you got this step done, once you got 200, just tell me if you got that. Okay, so this, so all we're doing is we're just testing this API. So this app, this third-party app, is for us to test the API, because like you just want to make sure that this works before we actually like code it out. So we're essentially sending a request to the API. So right now, what I'm telling you guys to do is I'm telling you guys to send a task to your personalized account. So it's sort of like me putting like Dicky cookies and then clicking add. It's the same thing as sending it in here. Does it make a little bit more sense? Yeah, there are a lot of APIs out there. Like, let me pull up a random API. APIs. Stuff. Okay, there we go. So see over here, right? There's like, oh yeah, so the Google Translate API, right? So yeah, I think I should explain a little bit more about what APIs are, because I didn't explain that part a lot. But so for example, a Google Translate API, right? It's almost the same thing. What happens is we send it web requests. So like, for example, a post request, a get request, right? In Hopscotch, we're sending a post request to this URL. And when we send this web request, we're sending it information for it to store. Like, for example, for Google Translate, right? Usually, like we're trying to translate things, right? So if you send a post request, for translating, like I could send it like, oh, I want to translate, how are you doing? And I'm going to translate it from English to French. And what happens is Google Translate will send me back a response saying, oh, it's comment ça va or something like that, right? So this API, all APIs do is like they get information from you and then they give you back information. So what we're doing with Hopscotch is we are sending it this API a task, and that's all we're doing. We're just creating a task. So I think it'll become a little bit more clear when we actually like make the whole thing so you can actually see it working, because it is kind of weird when you're just sending it on this like random thing. You just all you get is request received, comma updated, right? So for now, does everyone have like a status 200? I think that's the most important. So for the URL, right? Remember what I said is, so in the README, or actually not in the README, in the link, the GitHub link I sent, right? There is a MD file or a markdown file called to-do documentation. And if you click on that, you're gonna get this documentation over here, which tells you the links of everything. So like get tasks, create tasks, clear tasks. Yeah, so what Tax sent was right. So that would be, oh, that would be for getting. Right now we're trying to post. So we're actually trying to create a task. So it would be this one. Okay, so a post request. So for post, I put in my ID. I make sure to add contents and read books, because in this instance, it said you have to put in contents and then you put in some random message. Make sure to include the X, the token and the key, and then you should be able to get status 200. Has anyone gotten status 200 yet? If you have, send like an OK or something like that. Good stuff, good stuff. All right. For the people who are still doing it, it's okay. I'll leave this open. So actually, yeah, it should be fine. I'll just make it's all saved inside the history. Okay, good stuff. So now we're actually going to see if the API really works. This is like the part where I really hope it works. So so we created a task, right? All of you guys created your own tasks. So you'll be able to see that task once we use the endpoint get tasks. So once again, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it into the URL. You see how this is different, right? Because this says task/get. Oh, this one is task/post. All right. We're gonna change the method from a post request to a get request because we're not sending information anymore, right? We're just getting information now. We just want the information from the API. And the username is the thing that the bot sent us. So we're gonna send that over here. You don't need any body because actually there is no body on Hopscotch because a get request, you're not sending any information, right? So, but all you gotta do is the header is still there, so you can leave that there and click send. And there we go. I actually have some tasks because I was testing this out earlier on, but note that this most recent task ID that I just created, read books, is now here. So did anyone receive their task ID and contents in the response body? Good stuff, good stuff. Yeah, so that's essentially what we're gonna be doing. Like you see how we're using Hopscotch to send tasks. We're using Hopscotch to get tasks, but we still gotta display this in our to-do list, right? I think that's the main part. Because once we get this all displayed, we can start adding things in here. Then we've essentially created a to-do list. Before I move on, does anyone have any trouble getting or posting? So using the get tasks and creating a task. All right, if everyone's good, then we're gonna start moving on, okay? We can worry about clearing tasks later because I think that's the last thing we're gonna do, right? We're gonna first focus on creating and like displaying everything. Alrighty. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add in creating tasks because we wanna actually see the tasks that we've created. And so we're going to make actually, now that I think about it, right, we did add some tasks on Hopscotch already. So I think it would be a good idea if we displayed the list so far. So what we're gonna do is, first thing we're gonna do is delete this random code that we have here because we don't want to hard code. We're going to create a function called get tasks. And did I even? Okay, yeah, I did. Good. All right, so I'm going to make this function, all right? Get tasks. We're gonna use the URL because remember when we're sending a request, we're gonna need the URL, right? It's gonna be https 7 challenge.com/task/get/ that number that we have. So I'm going to copy it. And I realized, right, if I don't want to paste this every single time, because we're going to have 3 more endpoints, we should probably create a variable for it. Let ID equal this. And then to delete, add on the user ID. So I think I can put this into string, but I'm pretty sure you can leave it as a number as well. So that's our variable URL. All right. And so you guys all may be wondering, like, how do we send requests in JavaScript, right? And to send requests, we're gonna use something called fetch. And I'll teach you guys how to use it right now. So how fetch works is it takes in you see how right over here it says input and request info. So we're going to put in our URL, and then we're also going to put in parameters. Parameters, you guys may be wondering, is all of the stuff that might be inside the output request. So if you go back to Hopscotch, some of the parameters that we put was the header, and sometimes if it's a post request, for instance, a body. So the body will contain information like the content and stuff, right? So for the parameters for a get request, we're going to make the parameters. So this is a new thing that you guys might have seen. I realized I didn't really talk about it. A const. A const is similar to a variable, except it doesn't change at all. So it's sort of like let, but with let, you can sort of like modify it. With const, it's just like a variable you define once and you can't modify it ever again. It's pretty convenient if you don't want to change something, you just want to define it. So const params, I'm going to make this a JSON object because requests love JSON objects. And I'm going to first create my headers. My headers is going to have my token. And in this case, we know it's going to be 7wc.today. We're also going to have something called content type. It was already defaulted in Hopscotch, but you're going to have to manually add this inside our request because it's not defaulted in our request. Outside the headers, we're going to make sure the method is a get request. And this is how you make sure it's a get request. We're going to put method and then :get. Cool. And this is essentially it for get tasks. But remember, right, we want to call this function get tasks in our load list, right? So we should probably return it. Returning is a way of returning the value that you get from anything. So for example, if I do return 4, it'll return the value 4 when I call get tasks. For example, if I did something like response is equal to get tasks, response will be the value 4 because I returned the value 4. But in this case, we want to return fetch. So we're going to make fetch like this. But this is not all of it because there's a really weird thing with requests. And this may seem like super unfamiliar with you guys. Like you guys might not really understand what it is. I don't really understand what it was a few years back as well. But what a request is, it's asynchronous. So there's a lot of new things that we have to learn about, which are something called promises. So a request, so in this case, this fetch actually gives us a promise. So you see how if I highlight over this fetch, it gives me it's a function called fetch that gives me an input. I pass in an input and I also pass in parameters. And what I get back is a promise or a response. This is because usually in functions, if you call a function, you're going to get the value back like instantaneously, right? Because all the computer has to do is calculate the values. Like let's say you had a function, I just added 2 numbers up. So function add num, and I had a comma b or something like that. And I just return a plus b, right? When I call add num, 5, 3, 4, I'm going to get 7 like almost instantaneously, right? Because I could just calculate it. The problem with fetch is that you don't know, like you might not get a request back. That's why it's called a promise, because you might they might not end up fulfilling the promise. Kind of sad. Like for example, if I sent a request to an API that like is broken, for example, let's say I accidentally entered Zhang wrong, and I put in instead like .ca, which is invalid, then the request would never return anything back because that link is not valid. There's nothing to be there. Like let's say zhang.ca. See, it says this site cannot be reached. This is sort of what the fetch will give us. It'll just return us nothing. And this is the reason why we need promises for fetch, because there's a chance, there's a possibility that you might not get anything back. So that's the reason why we have to use a lot of like the syntax. We're gonna use something called await. And what await does is sort of like already in the English vocabulary part of it. All it does is it waits until fetch is done fetching. So until it gives us something back. Note that the reason why I put async in the start is because requests are asynchronous. So I have to put async in the start as well. Cool thing about requests is there's something called like this .then syntax. Because think about it, right? If I send a request to dehising.ca instead of .com, then I might not get anything back, right? So what do I do then? Or what happens if I error, right? That's why there's something called .then. And there's also a .catch. .catch is if there's ever an error. So what I'm going to do is, if there's an error, I'm going to console.log the error and be done with it. .then is if our fetch succeeds. So I get something back, or I get a 201. Well, that's another thing I should have explained to you guys. So the reason why I was asking for a status 200 is because 200 is usually the request, or it's green in this case, because 200 means your request succeeded, your request worked. Now, what if I do something like CA, just to see what happens? Nice, I get like nothing back. What if I do .com, but I enter a wrong route, like task A? Then I'll get a 404. 404 is a common error for like not found because it doesn't exist. So that's just a cool thing you guys should remember, I guess. That 200 usually means success, while 404 means like you can't find it. Okay. So the .then is when it succeeds. So if the request succeeded, then we're going to return the result back. And we're going to return the result in a JSON form. So we're going to do .json at the end, because I want the JSON values of it. Because remember get tasks, right? Get tasks gives me this. It gives me a list of JSON files like this. Okay. So once we do that, we're going to go back to our load list, and we have this over here. So what's the problem with calling get tasks over here? We're gonna need to also await, because get tasks is also part of the sending requests, right? Because if we don't do await, this might return us just a promise. It might not return an actual value. And the same thing goes for load list. We're gonna have to make this async. Okay. I've spoken a lot already, but like, does everyone understand what I've done sort of so far with async and await? Is anyone confused with actually like just ignoring the await and async parts of it? Does everyone understand what fetch did and how it sent the request and I got something back from it? If you don't understand, please say something in the chat so I'll be able to like explain it to the best of my abilities. Is everyone confused then? Or is my chat just not working? Can everyone still hear me? Okay, yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, got a response back. Okay, cool. Re-explain await and dot then. Okay, so so fetch is an asynchronous function, right? So if we don't put await, what happens is fetch will just give us a promise. And a promise is like some weird type of object, and we can't really, like, this is not a promise. This is a list of JSON objects, right? If we don't put await, then fetch will actually give us a promise, and we don't want promises. So all await does is it waits until the promise is done. The dot then syntax is if the fetch succeeded. If this fetch succeeded, like if I got 200 or I got response back, this res is whatever fetch returns. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to return this instead. I'm going to return the result.json. So it's going to give me all of this stuff. The dot catch is if this errors. Because if this errors, then all I'm going to do is print out the error. You can, if you're a little bit confused, you can just look up promises, JavaScript. I think this W3 Schools always has a really good explanation. So you see in a promise, right? There's going to be a pending, fulfilled, and rejected. So since the request, like, it's not instantaneous because you're actually sending a request to like an API, it's going to be pending while it's sending it, right? Contrary to something where you're just adding two numbers, because that's going to be instantaneous. For a request, you're going to have to wait until the API sends something back. And that's the reason why the state is pending. So this await is to wait until the pending stage is done and it goes into either fulfilled or rejected. So for example, the dot then would be if it fulfilled. So if it is good, unfulfilled. Unfulfilled, what happens is I'll return the result.json. The dot catch is if this errors. So like, if nothing gets, so unrejected, right? So if this request is rejected, then I'm just going to print out the error because I want to see what went wrong. Does that make a little bit more sense? I explained it a little bit more inside like the actual README. So if you're a little bit confused, just go scroll a little bit down into promises. And I sort of explain everything step by step. Okay, I'm going to move on because we are actually, probably gonna go over time. That's okay. I'm gonna go over there. Yeah, I'm gonna go over everything as slow as possible, so we'll be able to go through everything. So, if you don't understand await and async, that's okay, because all you need to understand is that this fetch just basically sent a request similar to what we did in Hopscotch, and I got the request back here in this response. So this get task will give me this, hopefully. And actually, we could just test that out right now, honestly. We do console.log response. And we'll test it out right now. I'm going to close all this stuff because you don't need it anymore. Okay, so we got printed one thing over here, and we'll see how it looks like. So you see how it says John, this weird gibberish, read books, and hi, right? Just like what we did in our Hopscotch, we got the same exact thing. So we have all of our JSON. We have all of our data. All you gotta do now is display it on the left-hand side. We have to put it into our HTML. And what better way to use that than using a for loop, right? Since response is a list, we're gonna loop through the list using a for loop. So I'm going to, I'll go over the for loop syntax. So I'm going to make a variable I, which is at 0. I'm sure there are other ways to make the for loop, but I think this is the most intuitive way. I'm going to loop this I for the length of the response, since response is an array. I'm going to add 1 to the I every single time. And I'm going to add onto the HTML. So I'm going to add on first a list item, because it's every list item. I'm going to make a header for the ID. Because remember over here, right? It returns the task ID and also the contents. Okay, so the ID, I'm going to add on. Remember how we access values inside a JSON object? What we do is we take the JSON object's response. We're going to access it at the index I, and then dot task ID. So this gets the task ID. So in this case, the first one would be 21, the second one would be 22. Third one is the 4. Oh, the first one's actually 20, my bad. Is the array start at index 0. Okay, then we're gonna add on the actual contents. I'm gonna add on second header and a paragraph tag plus response at I dot content. Because remember, contents is into my JSON, right? There's a little bit more. We're gonna have to close off all of our stuff. So I'm gonna do plus backtick P and LI. Now the cool thing about backtick is that you can make it multi-line. So I can just put this over here because we don't really have much space. Love this, that looks better. So all I did was I created the list item, put the header, I also put the paragraph, and I closed the list item. Close the unordered list, and I append it to contents in ID right over here. So if I reload now, there we go. We have our John, SSD, reflex, and hi. Does everyone understand this step so far? Does anyone want me to re-explain what I did? Okay, I'll just re-explain just this one more time, I guess. So the first thing we did was, we'll go in our HTML because this is sort of like where we have to follow up with, right? So we went through the header, we imported the CSS, we imported the app.js, and inside a container in contents, I called the function load list. And inside my function load list, I call get tasks. And get tasks, you scroll up a little bit, sends a request to the API containing all the information we need, and we get the response back, which is a JSON object, right? Or a list JSON object. Once you get the JSON object back, it's in response, and all I gotta do is loop the response, take the ID and the contents, and I display it. What I do is I add all of this onto HTML, and then I do document.getElementById.HTML, and I set it to the HTML that I just made. And I set it equal to this, or I set it equal to HTML inside my contents ID. So everything is now inside here. So if we go to elements and we click this is how our contents looks like. See this UL? Give me this UL right over here. And all this LI H2 stuff is what we just made over here. H2. Oh, nice. That's a mistake. I realized I didn't close the header properly. So that's how it looks like. So there you go. We got the paragraph tag, end list item right over here. And I make a new one now. I make another list item, another list item, another list item. And I finally close off the unordered list right over here. And we are done. So that's how we did this for the API. So just to test to make sure that I'm not scamming you guys, I'm going to make a post request. I'm going to add on something else. What is the task? Run. And let's post this. All right. And let me refresh. There we go. We got our ID. Run in the morning. Good stuff. So everything got refreshed. So what we've done so far is we displayed all of our to-do lists on the side. Is everyone caught up? If so, put like an okay in chat, I guess. Are the numbers out of order? Oh, okay. The reason is because most everyone is, so there's multiple people who are using this API, right? Because there's like around 50 of you guys, I'm pretty sure. And every task you guys create, the API generates a new ID for that one because it's unique. So in the time when I created a new ID, some other people created 3 others. So I don't know, maybe Alexander created a random task for his, which could be ID 39, and someone else created another one. Yeah. Yes, that is you. So yeah, so like if all of you guys created a task, then my next task could be like 50 or something. This is not really that important. I mean, this is really important actually, yeah, but the only thing you really have to care about is the fact that you're getting the contents, right? Because you don't really care about the ID, you just care about the contents of the task. Okay. Alrighty, so once we're done that, we need to start creating a task on the website. So this thing is still blank. If I put hi and I click add, nothing happens and something breaks. I broke it. Great, yeah. So do not click add, guys, because like it actually like just dies. So interesting. Okay. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to actually add a create task for the website. So to do that, we go back to the HTML and you see over here, there is a on click, right? James covered this over a little bit. And what he said was in here, we're gonna call a function inside our JavaScript, which will run the function to add a task in, right? And what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a function called, I guess, create task or submit task. I think submit task sounds better. And I'm also going to return false. The reason why is because I made this in a form. I should not have made this in a form. What happens was when you add a button in a form, it manually refreshes the whole page. So this is the reason why everything is blank and everything is dying. So if you do return false, then the page won't refresh and it'll just run the function. So now we gotta actually create the submit task function, right? So let's create that down here. And it's going to be very similar to load list. It's also going to be asynchronous because we're going to be calling a post request. I'm going to add in the URL. This time the URL is, you don't know what the URL is, go to the documentation right over here. We're going to copy this, add in brackets. And we don't need all of this. So we're going to add in, what did I call it? User ID. Okay. Perfect. So we got our URL set up. Now you gotta actually add in the parameters, just like last time, right? One thing is though, right? For a post request, are we just getting information? Or are we also sending information? Recall that a post request, we also send information, right? That's why we also need to include data in the body of our parameters. So I'll show you guys what I'm talking about right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing as I did before with constant parameters over here. Const param headers. Make sure that's application, not applications. Post request this time, and we're gonna also add in a body. Body, we don't know what it is yet. So I'm gonna make the body right before parameters. What does the body say? For creating a task, we need to take in an object containing the contents of a task. So this is how it looks like. So we're going to make another variable called data. And in this JSON object, we're going to add in content. And so what's the contents in this case? Contents in this case is the text area, right? So in this text area, we're gonna have to put in, we're gonna actually have to get the values inside this text area. So whatever's inside here, right? And James sort of covered this already as well. And to do that, you do document.get element by ID task contents. Why do I call it task contents? Because I called my ID task contents for a text area. To access the value inside the text area, I do .value. Cool. And then I make sure to point body and data. There's one more thing you have to do. What we're gonna do is we're gonna use something called Json.Stringify data. I've technically already stringified this. This is how it should be. What does Stringify do? Stringify turns this JSON object into all strings. So if we go back to Hopscotch, this is a perfect example, right? So this is what we inputted in, right? Notice how contents has quotations around it, right? And this one I don't have quotations around it, right? And turns out that APIs are very picky. So you need to make sure to stringify it. So what Stringify does is it turns content into an actual string, just like how they did it in Hopscotch. All right. So once that's done, we have our parameter set up. All we have to do now is use fetch. Now the reason why you actually don't need .then and .catch. You can add it in if you want, but doing this is fine. Because remember that for a post request, we're not getting any information, right? All we're doing is sending information. So we don't really care about what they return. We just want to send the request and be done with it. Okay. One more thing we're gonna have to do is we're gonna call load list, because once you're done sending a task, you want to actually reload the list so it shows up again in here. All right, so now let's test this out. So I think someone deleted the stuff. probably. Let me just check. Yeah, so it's empty. So if I do something like fake cookies. Interesting. Why is it? Let's figure it out. All right, so nothing is being sent. Interesting. If I post a request, cannot post. All right, because it needs to be posted. And there you go, we got run in the morning. Interesting. Okay, so I messed something up. You have to figure out why that is the case. Okay, so our request is not being sent properly. So this is where we have to like debug everything and figure out what's going wrong. All right, let's see. So what I'm gonna do before I send the request is I'm going to print out the parameter just to see if it's actually working. Okay. Ah, I know the problem. Haha, I didn't say this. I didn't do return false. So what happened was it was refreshing the page every single time. No, what's going on? Okay, wait, I have to refresh. That's the reason. I have to refresh on the browser as well. There we go. Perfect. So you see how I printed it over here? This is how it looks like. So remember, if your program isn't working, you should probably refresh the browser and also make sure you save your HTML files because that was an error that sort of plagued us for a while. Remember to include return false, otherwise it'll refresh without finishing this task. So this is sort of like our await. We're just making sure that it's not refreshing the page and our request is being sent properly. So see how over here, get rid of this now. I can add in as many tasks as I want. And it's all there. Another one. Cool. And if we close this page, well, I'm just gonna save. Actually, I don't need to save it. There you go. Everything gets loaded up back to where it was before, no matter how many times I refresh, because I'm calling the API. That's the really cool thing about APIs, because you're not storing it locally anymore. You're storing everything on an API. So does everyone understand what I've done so far? Okay, good stuff. So yeah, we have the form container and all that stuff, right? One more thing I wanted to tell you guys. So another really annoying thing is if I type in like fish math homework, I click add, it adds it. That's all good. Only problem is this is still there, right? I think we should probably delete whatever is inside here. And similar to what we did over here in our submit task, once we're done with the task contents, I'm going to copy this. After loading the list, or actually before, you could do whenever, honestly. I'm going to set it equal to blank. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the task contents at this ID and I'm just erasing it. So I do this again. Oh, I should probably refresh. Once again, I forgot to do that. Add, and it's blank. It's removed, so you don't have to delete it manually. Good stuff. So this is our nice to-do list so far. Only problem is this is a list where you cannot finish your homework or finish baking your cookies. So you actually need to clear these tasks now. And that is the reason why in our documentation, we have one more clear task. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions with what I've done so far with submitting a task? Does anyone have any problems? I can re-explain it again just one more time if you guys are having a little bit of trouble understanding this. If you're good, type in an OK in the chat, I guess. Okay. Good stuff. All right. So the last thing we have to do is clear tasks. All right. So how do we clear tasks, right? There's many ways you could do it. One way you could think of doing it is have a input thing over here, another button, sort of like add task, but instead it's called clear task, and then you can just put in the ID like 53, and I click clear. But that's boring because no one clears tasks like that, right? Everyone clears tasks by like clicking on an X near the task or like some button, right? So we're gonna do that. And if you remember how we created these or displayed these, we did this in load list, where over here, I made the list item, the header, and I also made this paragraph tag. And there's a reason why I use the backtick instead of just normal apostrophe. One of the reasons is because I wanted to use something called string formatting, because I want to actually add in a button that calls a function. So this is how our function is going to look like. So if we actually, before we do that, let's first look at the Endpoint API, right? What this does is it clears a task by calling this endpoint, and you pass in an ID of the actual task. So that's the reason why I had to give you guys the ID, so you guys would know which task to delete. So I'm going to create a new function called clear task. I'll be going to the async as well. And it's going to take in an ID. We're not going to make anything in it yet because we still have to display it right over here. So what I'm going to do is right after the page, or right after the paragraph, my bad, I'm going to make a form with a button in it. Clear task, and close the thing, call it clear task, button. Okay, I think that's good so far, and we'll just reload the to-do list. So now we have a clear task for every single one of these, right? But you see all we have here, right? All we have here is it calls the clear task function, but clear task takes in an ID because you wouldn't know which ID to delete, right? Like what if we're deleting 78 instead of 66, right? So that's why, and here, we're gonna use something called string manipulation, string formatting. It actually highlights up in VS Code. That's the reason why we're using it. And I'm going to take in response at I.task ID. You'll see what this does in just a second, because when I refresh, Someone is messing around with the API. Nice. I'll just put some random ones in. So if we take a look at this, go look at the form. See here on click, it calls clear task with 110 in it because the ID is actually 110, right? So we have everything set up now. We have clear task set up with ID. So all you gotta do now is call or send the request to clear the task, and we're good to go, I think. So that's all set up. All right, we need some CSS for this, right? We'll add that in later, I think. Let's first create the clear task function. So const URL is equal to the same thing that we did before. We go to the API, take clear task, paste it in, and instead of the username, going to add user ID. Oh. There you go. Okay. Data we're passing in is the ID. Nice. I'm not sure if this works. I think this. Gonna add the headers in as well, like last time. Stringify. This is going to be delete request because we're actually deleting something. And I'm going to fetch the URL. I'm not sure. All right. Cool. So this is almost, yeah, we're basically done now. We just need to add some CSS in just to make it look a slightly nicer. And I'm just going to add CSS into the task button. All right, and we go back to our to-do list. We can clear these tasks. So if I clear, okay, so that's another thing I forgot to add. So you see how the whole page refreshes, right? That's a problem because I did not add in return false, or I could just remove the form, to be honest. If I remove the form, then everything should work as normal. Right, so that's another thing I forgot to do. Once you finish clearing the task, you're going to need to load the list again because the list has now updated, right? So we're going to do await load list to top it off. Let's reload this. All right, got some tasks in. Just make sure that this works. I clear this one, and it gets deleted. I clear this one, it gets deleted. I clear this one, and we're completely done. So that's it for the to-do list. So hopefully you guys learned a little bit more about, first of all, reading API documentation and how to access these endpoints over here. You guys learned a little bit about async and await, even though it's not clicking now. Hopefully it will click in later on. And lastly, how to take the response you got from the API and actually display it onto an HTML web page. So the problem with this API is that the way I set it up, possible for others to get a hold of your ID and then just like mess around with your ID, I guess. But if they're lazy enough to not do that, you should be able to have your own to-do list. You should be able to play around with your own. A lot of the all of my code is on the repo over here. So if you download it and just open up index.html, you should be able to play around with this to-do list. Just make sure to insert your own user ID if you want to test it out with your own thing. So remember you going on the Discord bot and getting this ID. So that's it for this workshop. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, yeah, it was a lot to digest. So I'm going to be like, so if you have any questions, I guess, just put it into the 7-week challenge right over here, and then like I'll answer it to the best of my abilities. If you have any problems with like the API or sending the request, I'll help you out with that. But if there are no more questions, then yeah, like you guys are free to play around with it, make it look better, and maybe test out some other APIs out there like Google Translate. I heard Google Translate, like you don't want to use it too much because it's paid for some reason. But there are a lot of APIs out there that you can use for free, for sure. Like IMDb, for instance, has a nice API for movies. So you maybe if you want to like display a bunch of movies on a website, that's also pretty cool. But yeah, that's all for today, I guess. Have a good day, guys, and see ya.